Wednesday, September 18th, 2019, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So Billy is back. Some of you worry when Billy's not around, but a lot of times he's just asleep. Don't want to wake him up. But he came down, went back up on the sofa, and went back to sleep. So he will be listening, though. He's not silly, Billy. Anyway, today I want to talk about, of course, what happened yesterday. Federal Reserve had to intervene and help the banks and Wall Street with about $53 billion repo. Amazingly, the repo rate went even higher yesterday. After I made my video, it went up to 10%. So the Federal Reserve is always ready to help Wall Street, but never ready to help other sectors of the US economy. And all it does is really inflate the system with more and more Federal Reserve notes, which are erroneously called dollars, right? Because there's nothing behind those Federal Reserve notes, but we are forced to use it. Not in the UK here, but in the US, people are forced to use it to pay taxes. It's legal tender. Even around the world, I guess you could argue, it is the reserve currency of the world. And at the same time, there's an institution that can create it out of thin air and basically help their friends on Wall Street get out of log jams like they got the last few days. Devalue our currencies. And why is that? Well, the more and more Federal Reserve notes they create, the more inflation there is. It's the simple law of supply and demand. A lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people buy into the propaganda from the central banks, from the mainstream Keynesian economists who benefit from the banking system, who are employed by the banking system, by the politicians who you cannot trust, who never do what they promise, right? Who don't care if your currency is debased or devalued. So yes, the Federal Reserve came in yesterday and did their first operation in the repo markets since 2009, just before they started doing their QE after the financial crisis. So do you really think that things have been solved? The system has been reformed after the '08 crisis? Think again. So today, with what's going on in the markets, the Federal Reserve, we also have the FOMC today. They're expected to cut rates. Yesterday, even the Fed funds target rate went above the Fed's target. So the Fed funds rate is the rate at which banking institutions lend unsecured funds to each other, and the Fed sets that target. Right now it's 2 to 2.25, and that rate went up to 3% because of what was happening in the repo rate. So yeah, with that in mind, I want to talk about a man that's forgotten, even though his son is not forgotten, and that is Charles Lindbergh Sr., a former congressman from Minnesota. He warned the American people about the Federal Reserve over 100 years ago. He tried to impeach the Federal Reserve, and I want to look at that right now. Today I'll look at the markets at the end. So this is one of the quotes Charles Lindbergh made. This Federal Reserve Act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president, Woodrow Wilson, signs this bill, the invisible government of the monetary power will be legalized. The worst legislative crime of the ages is perpetrated by this banking and currency bill. So this is what he said about the Federal Reserve Act. Yes, he was a congressman from 1907 to 1917, Charles Lindbergh Sr. Of course, his son, Charles Lindbergh Jr., made the first solo flight across the Atlantic. I think it was in 1927 on the Spirit of St. Louis. I remember learning about that at school, but no one ever mentioned his father, how he warned us about the Federal Reserve and central banking in general. So let's look at how he actually tried to impeach the Federal Reserve back in 1917. So I found an article here as well. I didn't realize that he actually tried to impeach the Federal Reserve Board. And I'll go through this here. I'll put a link to this article below in the description. It's from crispawareness.wordpress.com. So this post is from 2013, and it says, "This is my first post, and I'm honored to begin with a man who was an originator of keeping it real, Charles Lindbergh Sr., Congressman from Minnesota, author of Banking and Currency and the Money Trust, and father of famous pilot Charles A. Lindbergh. He was truly a public servant for taking a stand against the Federal Reserve criminal enterprise, as can be seen here in the congressional record of on February 12th, 1917. So this is the Lindbergh articles of impeachment, and I'll read. Says, "I, upon my responsibility as a member of the House of Representatives, do hereby impeach the said W.P.G. Harding, Governor, Paul M. Warburg, Vice Governor, and Frederick A. Delano, Adolph C. Miller, Charles S. Hamlin, members, and each of them as members of the Federal Reserve Board, of high crimes and misdemeanors in aiding, abetting, and conspiring with certain persons and firms hereinafter named, and with other persons and firms known and unknown in a conspiracy to violate the Constitution and the laws of the United States and the just and equitable policies of the government, which said conspiracy developed and grew out of and was consummated from the following facts and acts, to wit." The guy who wrote this says now, after reading all 15 articles, you find the best was saved for last. 15th, that the Federal Reserve Act is void and unconstitutional, but that notwithstanding, the conspirators aforesaid have so manipulated things as to prevent the question of constitutionality of the act from being brought before the courts. And the guy continues, "I find it interesting that I was taught about the Lindbergh flag, but not one word about his father." Same feeling I have. With this 96 years later perspective, it is apparently who paid to have all public school history textbooks written. I've always wondered if this had anything to do with the Lindbergh baby incident. You can come to your own conclusions, but it seems as if opposing international banking interests always seems to bring unfortunate circumstances. This is what Lindbergh says at the end. I do not, however, expect to be discredited, though undoubtedly powerful influence will be used to prevent favorable action on the articles of impeachment. So yeah, you can read all the different points that Lindbergh made, all the 15 different points. So what happened to Charles Lindbergh Sr.? Well, looking here, it looks like he wasn't in office for much longer after these articles of impeachment. So you can make your own conclusions about that. It's 7:48 a.m. London. So where are the markets this morning? Spot gold is 1501.60. Range has been 1500 to 1503.84. So very narrow range. Silver has been sold off a little bit. It's down 11 cents, 2/3%, 1790. A low has been 1786, the high 1805. The Dow is down 39 at 27,064. S&P down 4, just around 3001. NASDAQ 100 futures down 13 at 78.75. So yeah, the markets have actually calmed down the last few days. There's not much volatility, notwithstanding what's going on in the basement of the financial system or the repo market, the funding market for Wall Street, right? We still need to keep an eye on that. I read an article yesterday on Zero Hedge, and it looks like the Federal Reserve could calm things down for now, but next Tuesday could be another big day where we could see these problems resurface. They are expected, of course, to cut rates today, the FOMC. It's going to come out, the announcement at 2 p.m. New York. There will be a press conference as well, of course. Currencies are fairly quiet here. The pound is at 124.89, down slightly. Euro 110.64, unchanged. We saw the dollar actually drop a bit yesterday. The pound and the euro rallied strongly against the dollar yesterday. Dollar versus the yen, 108.22, up 0.1%. Dollar unchanged against the yuan, 708.26. And we've also seen crude oil come off. WTI now is back below 60, 59.24. And Brent is still quite elevated, 64.30. But we did come off a little bit yesterday. I think there's news about Saudi Arabia saying that they could come back online in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Haven't really heard too much more about what's going on in relation to Iran and the drone attacks in Saudi Arabia. The bond market today will be probably potentially a big day for bond markets. The 10-year yield is at 180 here as I speak. So we have come off from 190 in the beginning of the week. It's about 10 basis points. So there you go. Highly recommend you look into Charles Lindbergh Sr. On Google. I'll put a link to the articles of impeachment, which is something I didn't really know that he had tried to do to the Federal Reserve. So that's very interesting. There you go. I've known about him for years and what his view on the Federal Reserve, and I actually didn't know about this. So, and let's keep exposing the Federal Reserve for what it is. It's unconstitutional, and it's an instrument of control by the private international bankers over the supply of money in the United States. Centralized credit, many people don't know, is one of the planks of the Communist Manifesto. But then again, a lot of people argue that the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx and Engels were all financed by the international bankers, right? So it's not surprising. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. You can also follow me on Twitter, Steemit, and on DTube. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.